Good afternoon. Hopefully this isn't too loud. I'm going to invite our Spanish translator up to the stage just to make a quick announcement. If there is anyone here who needs some translation services, he's going to announce his presence, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
Muy buenas tardes. Yo soy Edgardo Rodríguez, soy el intérprete. Si ustedes necesitan alguna ayuda entendiendo lo que se va a discutir hoy, yo voy a estar sentado aquí a la izquierda y pueden participar conmigo.
Good evening and welcome to Cookeville High School. I'm Corby King. I'm the Director of Schools for the Putnam County School System, and it's an honor to be here tonight to host this town hall event. I want to say thank you to the members of the department for being here tonight, for engaging with us. For the audience members who are here this evening, thank you for being out and offering your input to the state. This is very important for all of us in schools across Tennessee, so we appreciate that you're here and you're willing to hear from the department and provide feedback. At this time, I'm going to get out of the way. Chelsea, this is Chelsea Crawford, the Communications Specialist for the Department of Education. Chelsea, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Director King. I'm very excited to be here with you all in Cookeville this evening. I have not yet been on a stage where we have a set and we have drama students actually practicing back behind us, and so this one's extra special and extra fun. Thank you all for hosting us and allow us to come over here. As the director was mentioning, we are going all across the state. This is actually 7, 8, 9, 10. We are just about done with our town halls, and so have 3 more to go. This will be the third to the last town hall of 10 that the Department of Education has been hosting. And we've gone all across the state because we want to hear from you, and that's why I really appreciate that all of you are here this evening. We're really looking for input. We're looking for your perspectives, your opinions, your preferences, your priorities when it comes to our implementation of a law that was passed a number of years ago. And so we've been conducting these public town halls, namely just to hear exactly from you what it is that you think is important as we go about implementing this law. Before we get started, I just want to make sure to provide a little bit of baseline information so that we all kind of have a similar grasp of the topic at hand. But after I talk for just a few minutes, we're really going to turn it over to you and hear from you all about your priorities for this particular topic. Want to make a quick plug. If you have not yet signed up to speak, there is a QR code up here on the slides for you. There was also a QR code at the front desk when you signed in. This is a good way to go ahead and get your name on the list for speaking and kind of plugging in and give us your input a little bit later in the presentation. But I will say as we go on and kind of get started, we will go to the folks who have signed up first. And I'm certain we'll have more time, and so folks can simply kind of raise their hand to indicate that they would like to speak. The other thing I want to mention this evening, we have a wired microphone as opposed to a wireless microphone. So I'm going to ask a big favor of all of you, which is to come down here for this microphone when it is time for you to speak and provide your input. Just want to make sure that everyone can hear the comments that are happening in the room, and would invite you to come on over here. So I will appreciate the extra steps that it'll take to walk over to the microphone. So with that, I think we can go ahead and get started with that baseline information that I was telling you about. And of course, I want to ground all of this in the department's intention, which I think is a shared intention with all of our district schools, many of our educators across the state, which is to provide children with a high-quality education. We know that there are folks in Tennessee classrooms working really, really hard every day. We know that there are parents and families at home and supporting their students all together working really, really hard every day. And all of us are really aspiring to that high-quality education. So that's our intention here tonight. And as I mentioned, we are here to talk about a law that was passed a number of years ago that we will implement for the first time later on this year. And by this year, I mean this calendar year. We will be implementing this law for the first time and publishing some of the results of the implementation in November. So we have a real tight timeline. We've got a lot of work to do, but we are very excited to hear from you folks here in Cookeville and others who might have driven in to participate in the discussion tonight. I'm putting up a timeline for you all on the slide here in front of you just to show you kind of how long it's been since this particular piece of legislation became state law. It was actually passed a number of years ago, kind of ancient history and some of our experience, particularly when we think about the last several years kind of experiencing and emerging from the pandemic. But you can see up here that in 2016, the Tennessee General Assembly came together and passed a piece of legislation that is now in state law that calls for a letter grade system for schools. And what that means, just in the same way that you see your student's report card and they bring home an A, B, C, D, or F in a particular subject area, schools will also be subject to that same type of letter grade system, A, B, C, D, or F. And what we are doing on this listening tour as we engage with folks all across the state, we're wondering and wanting to hear from you, what should that letter grade represent? What should it constitute? What should it be comprised of? You see up here on this slide that there have been a couple of delays kind of on the timeline. There was some testing administration issues that kind of prevented the rollout and implementation of this law. There were some pandemic impacts. But again, as I said, this one will be implemented for the very first time later on this calendar year. And you will see some of the results of this legislation, that A, B, C, D, or F for schools in November. So as we go on to the next slide, I want to give you a quick a set of examples of the types of things we're interested in hearing from you about. The legislation requires two really important things be included in the calculation for A through F letter grades. So when we're thinking about all of the data that comes in from all different corners of our state, it will kind of move through a calculation and determine an A, B, C, D, or F. What are the types of data? What are the metrics? What are the types of indicators that we believe or prefer be represented in a letter grade system? The legislation requires two really important things be included. And first is achievement. You see that up here with the icon with the star. When we think about all of the work that our Tennessee teachers and others do to create rigorous academic standards, and we say, this is what we believe as Tennesseans, a student in XYZ grade should achieve in a particular subject matter area. Achievement is basically how close are they to becoming proficient, to mastering those types of standards, or do they need a little bit of extra support? Academic achievement must be required in the A through F calculation, so we know that one for sure. The second position that is laid out for us in state law is the growth indicator, and you see that up here with the little chart icon. Really, it seems similar, but growth and achievement are different. So if we're thinking about those academic standards, and we know that some of those standards can be met to achieve proficiency or better, I want us to kind of wipe that off the table for a minute. Regardless of proficiency, no matter where a student enters in, they have the opportunity to grow within a school year. Similarly, our schools can generate a growth score. Growth is one of the two components that is required to be included in the calculation for A through F letter grades. There's a third bullet point in the law that calls for other indicators to be determined by the department. And that's some of the things we really want to hear from you about tonight. We want to hear not only about the importance of academic achievement, the importance of growth, but we want to hear what else do we believe should be included because it is so important. There are some examples up here on this slide. There are some things that we think about pretty typically in terms of tracking performance at a school or a district or even sometimes a student level. There are some things that feel a little technical and might be a little bit more difficult to grasp until you get a lot of the kind of backstory. And so wanted to give some examples up here. Chronically out of school, we know that when students are not in front of their teacher in a classroom, that they are definitely not accessing as much wonderful instruction as they could. They're not absorbing as much of that learning as they could. It's a real challenge for our schools and our schoolhouse communities when we see high rates of absenteeism in a particular campus. English language proficiency is another kind of example or sample that we could be thinking about. When you think about, a little schoolhouse that might have a very homogeneous type of student demographic or population, lots of sameness across those students, that can give us kind of one scenario. But sometimes there are high populations, for example, of English learners who have not yet mastered their understanding of the English language and are actually learning the English language as they are learning that content. That can be a consideration about to include or not in an A through F letter grade calculation. When we think about elementary school versus middle school and high school, as parents, as the public, as taxpayers, there are definitely ideas, priorities that all of us have. Some we share, some we do not share, about what should be important in an elementary space versus a middle school space versus a high school space. In high school, we talk a lot about graduation. That's a really, really important and critical milestone. There also might be some other things in the high school space that indicate a student's readiness to move on after high school graduation to a post-secondary education, to a career, to the military, to some other pathway. But we want to know that those students are ready to be successful kind of in the world after they graduate in their senior year of high school. When we think about middle school, when we think about elementary, those types of indicators or those types of priorities might look different. We've spent a lot of time in the last couple of years talking about reading proficiency and the importance of reading by third grade. That's certainly something that could potentially apply in an elementary school. I will say, in the middle school space, we've heard some really interesting comments along the way at these town hall meetings about career exposure opportunities or dual enrollment, those kind of enriching academic experiences that could help a student earlier and earlier in their education journey determine what they're interested in, what they want to pursue, and how they need to get there and achieve that goal. So up here you see some samples, examples. This is not a comprehensive list. This is not an exhaustive list. It does include those two really important things that are required by law to be in the A through F calculation, and that's achievement and growth. And we're also interested to hear about those other indicators that we can include based on how this public engagement goes and what Tennesseans tell us they want or need to see represented in this A through F letter grade calculation. So as we move into the public comment space, I'm going to give us just a little bit of information about how this works. Everyone will have a few minutes to talk. I think we can provide lots of opportunity this evening for folks to really chime in as much as they would like to. So if you've signed up already, great. I'm going to call your name here in just a second. If you have not yet signed up, and as we go through the conversation today, you have an idea or a thought, and you say, "Hey, I want to chime in," just raise your hand. I'll also remind us that we have a wired microphone, not a wireless microphone, so we can't bring it to you, but we would ask that you come over to provide your comment. When it's your turn to get started, I'll call your name. I'm going to set a timer on my cell phone that'll give us 3 minutes, and that way when the timer is up, we'll all know that it's the next person's turn to provide some comment. But when I start your timer, I'm going to step away from the podium. And then when your timer starts to run out, and you've got about 30 seconds or so left on your timer, I'm going to step back up to the podium, and that's kind of my visual cue for you that your time is just about to come to a close. But please don't forget that we'll have lots of opportunity for folks to chime in tonight. So at this point in time, I think we are ready to go ahead and begin the public comment section of this town hall. I will remind you this microphone right over here. We do have a number of folks who have already signed up to speak, and so I'm going to call Mr. Tim Martin first. I see you are already ready, sir. We are going to have Director Corbett King, so you'll be next in line. But if you wouldn't mind, please, sir, go ahead and state your name, and I'll start your timer when you start.
Tim Martin, Putnam County Schools. Okay, I believe we should use academics and a reasonable growth measure. Growth calculations in the state of Tennessee are more convoluted than I can complain about in 2 minutes, but I would be more than happy to sit down and go over the 69-page long accountability protocol with anyone who's interested. Why do we need any measure such as chronic absentee, any metric about teacher prep, any metric about mental health, or any other services provided by the school district? Those things are done or suggested because we say it affects academics. If that is so, then it is already a factor in our academic achievement score. If you add it separately, then it's counted twice. Comparative measure. There should be criteria that is easily understood and that every district or school can achieve. As long as there's any type of ranking system, there will always be districts and schools at the top and others at the bottom, regardless of how well they met the criteria. Percentiles and cohorts are code words for ranking. As long as we're using those measures, it will be statistically impossible for all districts and schools to do well. If I told you that I would give your child's end-of-year grade based upon their rank in their class, regardless of how well they knew the material covered, how would that make you feel? How much anxiety do you think your child would have if they knew they had to beat their friends in order to pass the class? Is it statistically possible for everyone to be ranked number one? The answer is no. If you are ranking, is someone required to be last? The answer is yes. If this system would not be acceptable for your own family, it should not be acceptable for students, teachers, and schools under your supervision. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. I appreciate them. We're going next to you, sir. If you would please state your name for me when you come up to the microphone, and I will start your timer when you're ready.
Thank you. Corby King, I'm the Director of Schools for the Putnam County School System. So I think we need to consider having two indicators, having an academic score and a non-academic score when we look at the letter grades. From the academic score, we need to think about what do families want? What are they asking us? Academic performance is definitely important for our families, and we want to consider both growth and achievement measures in the academic performance, and I'll get into that a little bit more in a moment. What type of CTE programs are offered at the schools? Do we have a robust CTE program? How many career clusters? How many industry credentials are we getting when we go through the CTE programs? I think that's important to families and should be considered in a school grade. AP and dual enrollment classes. What's the AP participation rate, pass rate, dual enrollment? Same thing. How many students are taking advantage of those? How many partnerships do we have? I'm not sure what that metric would look like, but I think it should be considered when we talk about a letter grade for a school on academic performance. Fine arts programs. What kind of participation? Families want to know about that. Do we have a robust band program, chorus program, drama, theater, speech, whatever that may be? What is that like in the school, the participation, and find a way to put an indicator on that. Again, that's really important to families. When we look at the non-academic scores, safety and security is important to families. And this could be a checklist. Do we have an SRO? Has the school met all of the requirements for safety planning, performing the safety and security drills? That's something that's really important to families that know that we're putting in the work on a safety and security side. What type of mental health resources are available? What type, do we have a counselor in every school? Multiple counselors? Are we meeting ratios that are recommended by the National Counselor Association? Do we have social workers available? Do we have other mental health opportunities? Can we have an indicator that looks at safety or at the mental health resources? Again, I think that's important for families. What type of extracurricular programs? Middle school, high school, that's huge. That's so important in the life of a student, and I think that's something that families want to know about. Percent of certified staff, facilities and maintenance. Do we have an indicator to talk about the age of the buildings, how we maintain them? What type of indicator would that look like? But I think, again, that's important for families and for the students when they pull up. Is the school well-maintained? Is it nice? There should be some type of grade, I think, on that. So do I have time to go on, Chelsea, or do you need me to sit down and let others speak? Okay, can I come back up? Because I've got a lot. All right, I'm going to stop there, and I'll come back and get into the academic piece if we've got time. Go ahead? Okay. Okay. So on the academic measures, we need to decide what are we trying to measure? What do we want families to know? What is the story? What are we telling families? What is important? Letter grades should measure what families think that they measure. So currently the ELA measures all ELA standards, but is often equated to the reading ability. And I want to use the third grade retention for just a moment here for this example. Reports state that 69 or 65% of third grade students are reading below grade level, but that's not what the test measures. It measures all third grade ELA standards. As long as cut scores are based on a percentile, we will always have 60 to 65% students that don't meet expectations. Let's consider what the tests measure, what that information tells us about the student's learning, and then what it tells the family. It's telling the family that your student, to meet expectations, is outscoring 60 to 65% of the students in Tennessee. And as long as we base that on the cut score, we're always going to have that type system. Clear, consistent targets for schools are important. All schools should know the targets to achieve a specific grade before the school year begins. Let's not make this relative on data that lags behind, but we know the clear targets when the school year begins. All schools should know what constitutes an A, a B, a C, a D, or an F before we ever get started. This should not be a comparison or a cohort group that changes every year. The targets should be the same. The letter grades should incorporate both absolute achievement measures and growth scores. And I pulled this from the Tennessee Department of Education website on TVAS. But achievement measures a student's performance at a single point in time, the performance on that standard, and is highly correlated with the student's demographics. So the students in higher socioeconomic demographic categories are always going to score more. And that's coming right off the Tennessee Department of Education's website. Growth measures are growth over time. It's a measure over time, and it typically is not related to the student's demographics. And that's why it's important to use the growth measure so that we can then see, how are we doing with this student and where they come in at the beginning of the year versus where they come or end up at the end of the school year. By measuring students' academic achievement and growth, schools and districts will have a more comprehensive picture of their own effectiveness in raising student achievement. So when we talk about the growth measure, measures should be generated from the district's universal screener. Use the data collected throughout the school year to show growth. Either allow districts to choose our screener, whether it's iReady, MAP, AimsWeb, whatever that may be, or the department pick one. If there's a favored screener, the department says AimsWeb is it, pick AimsWeb. All of the districts are going to use that. And then we collect that data, we send that to the department now. Let's use that for the growth measure. So we know that when Corby comes in class and I sit down at the beginning of the year and I take that fall assessment and I score at this level, at the end of the year, did I make gains? Did I improve? If I did, then I've shown growth. That teacher's done its job, I've done my job as a student, and I've shown growth, and incorporate that measure. Okay, thank you. So I'll incorporate that growth measure into the accountability rather than basing it just on the TCAP and how I compare with a whole different cohort group and a whole different set of standards in a different grade level. Change the category designations to more accurately reflect grade level expectations. Cut scores for met expectations around the 45th percentile would more accurately reflect grade level expectations. So if we were looking at a bell curve, the majority of students are going to fall in that 45th to 65th percentile. I think that would be a more accurate, that's where most students are going to score, that would be a more accurate reflection of grade level acceptance. Those students in that 45th to 65th percentile are good, solid, average B, C students. They're performing right where they should be performing. So we're telling the students that they're not meeting expectations who are performing right where they should be. So let's change, if we need to add a category, add something, then let's change that so that those students who are good, average, developmentally appropriate students are meeting expectations. We can still have exceeding, we can have below or approaching in another way, but let's incorporate something that looks more like what families would understand and what makes sense. And then there should be specific criteria for meeting the minimum standards. They should not be based on ranking. As long as we use percentile ranks, there will always, well, Mr. Martin's already said this part. I'm not going to repeat all of it, but it's just like when I was a teacher. When I gave a syllabus at the beginning of the year, here are the assignments. I gave you a rubric, and this is what you have to do to make an A. This is what you have to do to make a B, a C, and then it's up to the student to, and I working together to meet that A, B, C designation. It should be the same for schools. We have a rubric with a clear designation. We know this is how it is to make an A. This is what we need to make a B. And it's not something that we change in the middle of the year because we have too many A's, or we have too many B's, or too many C's. Let's make this a clear designation and a clear target that we can all achieve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Director, and I know you had a lot of very thoughtful comments on that paper. I appreciate every one of them. I also want to take a moment and let you know I am in the very bright light here, and I realize about halfway through that I'm like, gosh, am I scaling at everybody? It's not my intention. I do want to take just a quick second and comment on your comments, sirs. Both of you talked about kind of the letter grade system and its importance to be able to communicate something with parents and families. That's something we've talked a lot about across the town hall system series, and kind of in an accountability system. You know, some of that very technical stuff can and sometimes not mean a whole lot for parents if we don't do a really good job of explaining or kind of translating out of very academic jargon. And so I just wanted to call out that both of you kind of commented on that component about what, you know, the intended audience for this system is, and I appreciate the comments that you made. Others who would like to chime in and provide some comment, please feel free to come on over to the microphone. You can raise your hand. I'll give you a minute to walk over there. But really interested to hear from this group, and we've already got a couple of really strong comments, very thoughtful pieces of input. What are some of those other indicators? Yes, sir, come on up to the microphone, and we'll get you started here in a minute. But
Sure. Thank you. Lynn McHenry, Putnam County School System, so I'm here local. One thing that concerns me when we talk about grading schools, A, B, C, D, F, is obviously the amount of funds. We know that schools are oftentimes successful or not based on the amount of funds. And we know that although the state gives a tremendous amount of funding to schools, at the same time, many counties give a whole lot more to education. So when we start comparing some schools to others, we would need to definitely take a look at how much each student in that county would receive, not just from the state, but how much they actually have through a county that has a lot more funds to give than those that don't. So when we look at certain programs, well, we say we expect them to have these programs or those. If the money's not there, they shouldn't be necessarily, their grade shouldn't be affected by the amount of funds that they don't have. And especially coming from this area where some of the funding is determined, well, it is across the state by county commissions. If extra funds aren't available, then there's lots of programs that can't be given the attention that would need to be there and might affect the grade that the school has. And those things would need to be kept in mind in order to form that ABCDF. Thank you.
I appreciate your comments. I appreciate you jumping up and walking all the way around to the microphone too, sir. I really appreciate that. Others who want to chime in, kind of thinking back on those indicators that we believe should be important when we think about implementing this law and rolling out A, B, C, D, F for a school. What are the things that we believe should be represented, should be important? We talked about academic achievement, we talked about growth. What are some of the other indicators that might come to mind? I'm interested in hearing from others. Feel free to raise your hand or come right on up to the microphone. I can't see what your faces look like at all, so I can't even tell if somebody's thinking about saying a comment. But please do just raise your hand for me or come on up to the microphone. I'd love to hear from you. Yes, sir, I see you back there. Come on up here if you would, please. When you get down to the microphone, if you would just state your name and I'll start the timer when you start.
My name is David Stout, and I'm just a concerned parent, and my comments will be far less academic than the ones that came up before me. But what I'd like to emphasize from a parental standpoint, what we'd like to see is something simple. I've heard a lot of detailed measurements that they'd like to see. When it comes time for the parents and parents understanding what that means, I think it's easy to get very complicated in that way and basically disengage the parents through too many measurements. What they want to know is when my child graduates, will they be competitive? When they go out in the job market, it's going to be competitive. They are going to be compared to their peers. They are going to be measured. A lot of them will actually have to pass a competency test before they can even get an interview. So the idea that everybody gets a participation trophy, and those days are gone in this competitive work environment. So I think lack of accountability is what got us here in the first place. So accountability is going to be critical. And a parent should be able to look at a grade like this in the end and determine, is that a school district I want my child to go to? Is that a school I want my child to go to? And they shouldn't have to go through a bunch of hoopla and extensive reading and extensive analysis to understand how that school performs against other schools within the area. So I'll leave it with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those comments. I appreciate those, sir. Thank you very much for coming in. Yes, I mean, I think it's very easy to quickly get lost in some of the very technical
Content, whether it's education or any other kind of industry or sphere or discipline. And so I think from our vantage point, of course, is we would love for all schools to be A's and everybody to be able to achieve even a student level at that absolute excellent potential. We certainly want it to mean something and be understandable when this rating system and law is implemented. So thank you very much for those comments. Others who would like to chime in, please feel free to raise your hand. Yes, sir, come on down.
Appreciate you. And when you get to the mic, Director, if you would please say your name, and I'll start your timer when you do.
Thank you. Kurt Drumbarger, Director of White County Schools. I am a Director of Schools now. I was a social studies teacher by trade originally, and I remember a time, if you've been doing this as long as I have, where the pendulum was on the other side. We've been here before, where achievement was the factor. So it was the metric upon which we were measured as schools. And I think at that time, the department realized that there was more to school than just achievement. And that's when the growth measure really came about. We swung that pendulum perhaps too far to the growth side, and it became about that. And so at this point, all schools recognize the need for accountability. No one shies away from that. And perhaps there's a need to move that pendulum back towards the center for that achievement measure a little bit. And no one shies away from that. But my fear is that we might swing the pendulum too far back. And we've been there before. And we don't want to make, as a history teacher, we don't want to make those same mistakes again. I remember being the principal of an elementary school that had excellent achievement. And at the same time, our legislators were rewarding schools all over the state for having great growth. We couldn't show growth. We could, we weren't. But we weren't showing that growth. It was difficult to grow on. But we had twice the achievement that some of our counterparts had, and they were getting rewards for that. My fear now is I have schools in my district that the State Department and myself have rewarded and awarded for being growth schools that could very possibly under a full achievement model, or one that's heavy laden on achievement, could now be a failing school. That's going to be really difficult for me to explain in our district, and I know that's something that's shared across the state and in other districts. As I look at the state website on this subject, we have senators and representatives quoted on there saying parents of our K-12 students should have a clear understanding of where our schools fall on the grading scale. Another said that A through F letter grades provide a straightforward mechanism for differentiating the performance of Tennessee's public schools. And still another says that A through F letter grades will increase transparency within districts for both parents and students. How can that be if it's September of 23 and we're still not determined on what that formula is? How is that transparency? We're still, kudos to the department and the commissioner for being here tonight and taking the feedback, but we're almost 5 years removed from when the legislation was passed, and we don't even have a formula that we're going to implement this year on students that aren't even in school anymore on some of that data. So I don't see that as being transparent and straightforward and easy for parents to understand. I think there needs to be a lot of clarity, and if and when this rolls out, there needs to be a crosswalk for parents and directors of schools to understand how did we get to this point, and to make sure that we're not swinging the pendulum too far back. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Your timer's going off literally right now. So thank you for staying exactly on the dot. I'll invite you to come back up anytime.
Don't do that. Thank you very much for those thoughtful comments. And I will say, one of the other pieces we've heard through these town halls is there's a lot of metrics, there's a lot of evaluation systems, there's a lot of labels and kind of acronyms and jargon and that kind of thing, and how do they speak to one another. I believe it was last week we were talking about teacher evaluations and that kind of framework, and how does the teacher evaluation system match or not match other ways that we are rating performance. And so I appreciate that you pulled that out a little bit, and I also deeply appreciate the don't want to repeat history component. I think it has been a number of years since this law was passed, and certainly we are attempting right now to take a hard look at it and provide something that is going to meet the letter of the law, fulfill our obligation as a state agency to do that, but also provide as meaningful information as we possibly can that rates as fair as we possibly can. Others who would like to chime in, I've got to block the sun here, need some sunglasses. Others who would like to chime in, feel free to raise your hand or come on down to the microphone. Would love to hear about some of those indicators that you believe are important that should or could be included in an A, B, C, D, F letter grade system for schools. We've heard a little bit about some of the readiness for kind of what happens after graduation. I talked a little bit about some of the ideas we've heard in other town halls in the middle school space or the elementary school space. Interested to hear what you all think, what your big priorities are. And when we look at some of these prompts up here on the slide, when we think about that letter grade system being rolled out and published for the first time later this fall, you go on a website and you see ABC Elementary and it has an associated letter grade. What should that letter grade be representing to parents and families? That's the kind of information we want to hear from you tonight. Others who'd like to speak, feel free to raise your hand or come on up to the microphone. When we think about that A, B, C, D, F, we've talked about this being a rating system that's really intended to convey information to families, to the public, and hopefully not a very technical, amorphous kind of way. What are the things that should be represented? We know that the legislation requires academic achievement, requires growth. What are some of the other things that we believe are important that should be included? Another thing I'll say, we can think about the high school, middle school, elementary space differently. That's not off the table. In fact, everything's on the table. I would love to hear from you about some of those other things that are really important that we would want a letter grade system to be able to communicate. Others who want to chime in. Feel free to raise your hand or come on down to the microphone. Interested in hearing your input. When we think about that letter grade system being implemented for the first time in November, what are some of the things that we think are important that should be included in a calculation? As I mentioned, we've got just a couple more town halls to do. After tonight, we've got 2 more. So we're really interested in making sure you have an opportunity to chime in. Others who want to provide some input. I think I see a hand. Yes, ma'am. Come on down to the microphone. When you get over to the
Hi, I'm Cindy Taylor. I am a retired teacher and a retired administrator, and I have 2 granddaughters who go to school here. So my question is it really is a question. I'm thinking of being in the seat of these administrators and educators and thinking about that A through F. So in the very late 1970s, when I was in college, we were expected that our students would be on that bell curve that Mr. King talked about, that I would only have a few that were really great students, and that I would have only a few that failed, and the rest would fall in that bell curve. Then when I got my master's degree and my other degree later, both in education, we came to realize that it wasn't about the bell curve. It was about mastery. It was about how are we actually measuring students? And do we not want every child to reach that mastery level? Do I want both of my granddaughters to reach that mastery level? And the answer is yes, I do. So is there a number that you've put on the letters from A through F? Are these school systems going to be put in a situation where not all can reach mastery because of the priorities that you have aligned? That is not how excellence is achieved in schools. So that representation, using a rubric, very specific, and yes, of course, it's going to be on academics and growth. And I'm so with this dad who was here that said, let's not make this complicated. Let's look to see what are the important measures. And Mr. King's listed those. But every school and every system in our state should be able to get an A. They really should. So let's look at, are you looking at a bell curve and expecting some of our schools to get an F? If so, that's not what true education is about. Please think about that.
Thank you very much, Ms. Taylor, for your comments. And we've heard that notion a couple of times along the way here, are there too many A schools?
And I think, I referenced this earlier, I wish every school was an A and every kid was getting an A in every subject all the time, because that's, I think, what we all want for students and we want for the future of our state. But no, that's definitely not the reason why we have approached this kind of public engagement period. I think we do want to make sure that the A through F letter grade system, if it is intended to be a rating system that conveys information to parents and families, that it can rate meaningfully and differently. For example, an A should not be anything, or a B should not be anything, or a C should not be anything, or an A, B, C, all could be anything, when you look at a particular indicator. And so we're really trying to make sure that as we go about implementing this for the very first time, implementing this law that we know will have some impacts, that we are thinking ahead about how to be fair, how to convey information meaningfully to the public, but then also what comes next after these letter grades are published. Unlike some other kind of, especially federal accountability laws, there's not necessarily a next step laid out in the law, good, bad, or ugly, right? There's no additional supports, there's no additional funds that come along with any particular rating on the A through F scale. So nothing if you're really, really good, and nothing if you're really, really bad. And so I think we've had a lot of internal discussions about what can we as a state agency be doing to kind of fill in the blanks on then what after these letter grades are published. How are we going to be able to support schools who need some additional support? How are we going to be able to spotlight and highlight the things that are working really well and try to replicate them in other areas? So anyways, just a couple of comments, but thank you very, very much for coming up to the microphone. I appreciate you providing input. Others who would like to chime in, would love to hear from you all. Other thoughts, questions, concerns? We'd love to get them on, get them heard about tonight. We are going to look through kind of all of the public town halls comment, as well as things that have been sent to our agency and kind of evaluate what we're hearing at a greater scale. So this is a great opportunity for you to kind of have your 2 cents marked on that record and be able to carry that forward in the conversations we'll have in the months to come. I will also acknowledge that we've been here for about 45 minutes. The town hall is going to go till 7. My team is going to be here until 7. But I do want to respect everyone's time in the room. And I don't want to keep you here too late and missing dinner if we have exhausted the comment in the room. So let me give us another couple tries to see if there are others who would like to provide some input tonight and come up to the microphone and say a couple things. Questions, comments, considerations, do's or do not do's. All of that is fair game, and we'd love to hear it. Yes, ma'am, I see your hand. Come on down.
I'm Alice Brown. I'm the ESL coordinator here in Putnam County, and I have 2 specific concerns. One is sort of trying to boil things down into a very simplistic thing. And I'd like to bring up, for example, graduation rate, where that makes sense for students who are on a regular path. My students a lot of times come as 9th graders in March, April, and May, which cuts their time in school down to virtually 3 years, and they're still accountable for the same graduation rate. So that's been a deep concern. Graduation is very strong with me. That's what I want for all my students. I think that's very, very important. But it can be challenging for some coming with no English, with very little schooling in March. So sort of weighing the same. The other thing I would like to put on the table is with the English language acquisition. That also looks different for elementary students than it does in high school. Some of that is because we know that language acquisition comes very quickly and easily with the younger students. And so measuring an elementary school and a high school with that same measure may be challenging and a little bit against even the research in language acquisition. So those were just the 2 sort of specific points I wanted to bring to the table.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brown. I appreciate those specific points, and we will take them. Really, really thoughtful, and I appreciate you coming to the microphone.
Others who would like to chime in and provide some input on what that letter grade system could represent, should constitute, what should it be made up of? Interested to hear from you. Yes, ma'am, I see you. Come on down.
Go ahead and chime in there. We're excited to hear it. If you would, please state your name.
Yeah, Jill Ramsey. I'm a Putnam County School Board member, former teacher, former principal. I really wanted to try hardest to listen tonight, but I just can't. It really bothers me that we have to label schools. I don't know what the purpose of this law was, but I remember my days as a principal and trying to A, B, C, D, F your school as a principal, and I think about when I got up every single day, the first thing I thought was, let's really stress in academics. It was so seldom about academics. Our day began and academics was on the back burner because we had to fix toilets. We have a high population of ESL students. We have a high population of students with special needs. How are you going to measure that in a school? To narrow down every school in this state to a letter is demeaning to me because there's so much more to it, and that's all anybody's going to see. They're going to see a letter grade, and they're going to say, that school's a B, that school's a C, that school's an F, and that F school could be doing amazing things with their students, but they've got that letter grade attached to it, and how do you overcome that? It really bothers me. I agree with so much of what's been said, but I see some of those schools, like someone mentioned earlier, that are reward schools that are now, we're going to see an F on that school. It's a scarlet letter. How do we overcome that? And then if you're that school and teachers are working so hard and parents are working so hard, everybody that works at that school is working so hard, and it's got an F on it. Do you know how hard it is to get out of bed and come to work when that's your letter grade? It's just demeaning. And I know that means nothing because that's the law and that's what we have to do and that's what we're going to do. And we're going to go and we're going to work just as hard as we always did for kids because it's about kids. And it should remain about kids, not a letter grade put on a school.
Thank you very much, Ms. Ramsey. I appreciate your comments. Thank you for jumping up, coming on over to the microphone. Others who would like to chime in?
Either building on some of the things you heard tonight, reacting to them. I see you come in. Yes, ma'am.
If you would state your name.
Sure. Hi, I'm Dawn Fry. I'm too tall for the microphone. I am a Putnam County School Board member, and I have twins. They're now 21, but they went to Cookeville High School, boy-girl twins. And my daughter is typical, and my son has autism. So I guess I really have more questions than because I don't completely understand how, as Ms. Ramsey brought up, how are you going to include SPED students? Because on your slide about graduation rate, it said those that graduate in 4 years plus a summer, okay? So my son walked the graduation line in 4 years, but he is still in the 18 to 22-year-old program and working just as hard, if not harder, than some other students. So will he be counted in a graduation rate even though he didn't do it in 4, or do you not count him? And I think to not count those students is wrong because they work very hard and they're a part of our school as well. We have a fabulous SPED program here, and I just want to see that all the work that they're doing, even though they don't fall into that growth and all that stuff as our typical students do, that they are counted and seen just as much as all the other students are. So that would be my comment.
Thank you very much for that comment. I appreciate it. We heard some comments similar to that about kind of the circumstances that students may be in, whether it's
A student with a disability, a student who doesn't have a disability, students who are in, poor socioeconomic circumstances. We've heard a lot about kind of the subgroup, if you will. That's a very insensitive way to reference it. But, how do you account for students who are doing really, really great work? And how do we account for those who might need some additional support? So I appreciate the comment that you made, ma'am. Others who would like to contribute any input? Would love to hear from you. Questions, considerations, comments? Anyone else who would like to provide some comment for us as we carry these conversations forward for the next couple months? I'm going to do a last call for comments for those of us who are in the room. Anyone want to contribute? Okay, I will move us on to the next slide. I want to give you an opportunity to keep in touch with us on this topic. We are collecting public town hall comments, just like we've done tonight. You are also welcome, encouraged to email us at any point in time. This email account up here, schoollettergrades@tnedu.gov. We're accepting public comment there. Anytime you want to email us, as many times as you would want to email us, we are excited to read it and be able to kind of move that forward into the next step of this process. As I mentioned, the letter grade system will be implemented for the first time later this fall, and in November, when that state report card website gets published with lots of information about our schools and districts, you'll see for the first time that letter grade system has been implemented and assigned. As a next step after these town halls conclude, we're actually going to be with our superintendents next week talking more about this topic. We're going to have a series of kind of working groups and folks come together to review the public comment that you all have contributed, and so many have others have contributed as well, and we'll be able to kind of think through the priorities, the prioritization of the sub-indicators or the components of this calculation. So with that, I will go ahead and dismiss those of us who are in the room and turn you loose to go home for dinner. As I mentioned, my team is going to be here until 7 o'clock in case there are others who would like to chime in, but deeply appreciate you volunteering your time to come out tonight and talk about this issue. Thank you all for being here. We'll see you soon.